The night the stadium lights cooled over Eugene in October 1984 had smelled of wet leaves, chalk dust, and the metallic edge of autumn. The city had wrapped itself around a single narrative. High school football coach Mark Ellison finally brought a championship home. And every diner, every bar, every open garage with a radio humming had been tuned to the same pulse. People said they saw him everywhere, shaking hands by the chain-link fence, smiling for a Polaroid by the field house, locking the double doors of the gym with his clipboard tucked into his elbow like a book he never forgot to return. The boys he led called him coach with a reverence that made a single word feel like a title. He patted shoulder pads, he said he was proud, he told them to go home. He turned toward the locker rooms. He did not make it home. By sunrise, the driver's door of his sedan yawned open to the asphalt, dew stippling the window glass. The clipboard sat on the front seat with a felt-tip pen uncapped beside the paper, still wet enough to leave a faint comma where it had kissed the margin. There had been no scuff marks on the pavement, no dragged lines from saws, no torn fibers snagged on the door. A custodian walked past it at 6, then again at 7, then finally peered inside at 7:30 because the unease would not let him keep walking. By noon, officers had snapped photographs and dusted the horn-rimmed radio dial for prints. They looked at the field, at the empty visitor stands, at the storage sheds with their scrapes of old paint showing through like scars. The town began to speak in low, careful voices. Coach Mark Ellison, the man in the hallway photo with the crease-iron smile and the banner over his head, Coach of the Year, 1984, was gone. Rumors were fast in that first week and then slow for almost 40 years. One of the players claimed he saw Ellison talking to a man in a county windbreaker by the dumpster. Another swore he heard an argument in the weight room like a ball bouncing and refusing to settle. People said he'd been having trouble with a parent, that he'd been visiting someone in the next town over, that he'd made enemies he never admitted to because he treated kids like sons and sons sometimes made other men feel small. In the team photograph on the library wall, a boy in the second row, narrow shoulders, the tense smile of someone who had learned quickly how to duck and wait, looked as though he might have spoken if he could find the exact right sentence. His name had hung in whispers later that winter. The missing player Ellison had defended when the uglier rumors began to move like river water under ice. The school changed in layers. A new floor went down in the gym, pale and bright with a varnish that smelled like sweetness. Banners yellowed. A mural went up and then a different principal painted over it with a different mural. Coaches came and left. Freshmen in 1998 became parents themselves by 2023 and told their kids about the October that never closed its circle. Mark Ellison remained as a frame and a caption in the hallway, his story shrinking to a plaque. The case grew quiet but never quite went cold in people's mouths. It waited, and then the building itself coughed it up. The man who found the locker in 2023 had worked nights long enough to know when a building felt heavier than it should. He rolled the row of metal cabinets away from the cinderblock wall in the old equipment corridor because a slow leak had crept along the baseboard and bloomed a dark flower on the paint. The cabinets shuddered. Behind them, a locker, an older style in a color the district hadn't ordered since the late 70s, stood sealed. The padlock was frozen with age. The hasp had been crudely driven through with a self-tapping screw, as if someone wanted a second promise no one would open it. He called his supervisor. She stood there a long time with her keys and her silence, and then nodded. The screw came out with an ugly scream. The door gave. Inside lay 3 stacks of paper tied with cotton string that dusted its own knot when you touched it. A whistle, heavy, old school, the kind coaches wore on strong cords, rested on top of the letters as if it had been set there to keep them from floating away. Its lanyard felt stiff. On the lip of the whistle, where it would have nicked a tooth if someone had clamped down hard, a rust-dark smear had dried into the metal grain. Beneath the stacks, there were clipped articles, each one sliced neatly from a newspaper, headlines about the championship, about the sudden disappearance of Coach Ellison, and, folded into the center of the bundle as if someone had put a hand over its mouth, a smaller headline from later that fall about a player who had drifted off the roster and stopped coming to practice. His name had been Tyler Reed. 18, a junior. Wide receiver with good hands, decent speed, a way of reading the ball in the air that made him look older than the yearbook said. Tyler had missed a week with a family issue, then 2 with an ankle tweak, then simply never returned. It had been Ellison, Mark to the adults, coach to the boys, who told anyone who pressed too hard to back off. Tyler was a good kid. Tyler needed room. Tyler would be back if and when he could. The rumor that had twisted its way around Tyler's name by Thanksgiving had never made it into print. It didn't have to. The players heard what the boys hear before the grown-ups do. Something had happened in that locker room that autumn a coach didn't want on paper. The whistle went to the lab. The cotton strings that left a faint chalky bite on your fingertips went to evidence. The envelopes, each in the same narrow hand, each numbered at the top right as if the writer believed order could save him, went into clear sleeves. When the sheriff's office called the state lab with a request for a rush test, the tech who answered took down the name, and then underlined it twice. The Ellison case, people remembered. The smear on the whistle spoke more readily than anyone expected. It was not rust. On the first pass, it yielded a partial profile. On the second, stronger pass, the DNA resolved. It matched old samples taken decades before when Tyler's mother had given officers the last strands from her son's brush. On the letters, the fingerprints lay like a confession you could only see when the lamp angled just so. They belonged to Mark Ellison. He had written every page. He had sealed the locker. He had never taken the whistle back out. What the letters said was not a single smooth story but a series of starts, attempts at truth that fell away to the same anxious apology. I failed him. The first one began, without naming Tyler, as though writing the word would change the paper itself. I thought I was stopping a fire with my hands. The handwriting leaned forward, then straightened, then sagged as if the hand had grown tired of telling the same thing over and over. There was yelling, he wrote in another. It echoed. The pipes made it worse. Each page circled the same night. After the championship, the kids had screamed, the band had hammered out the school song, someone had hoisted a water cooler and tipped it. He had sent them home, then found Tyler waiting by the trainer's office with his duffel and his jaw set hard. Tyler had not cared about plays or praise. He had been ready to talk about a man with a key. Not the coach, someone else who slipped through the building and folded his authority around the boys like a second skin. The rumor that had bled around Thanksgiving, the one the team tried not to put a noun to, finally wore its name in that narrow corridor under the gym. A volunteer aide, a local business owner who bought cleats for kids who couldn't afford them, a man liked by the right people. Tyler said he had tried to warn Ellison back in September, and had been told to keep his head down, focus, ignore the talk. The victory had given Tyler a power he had not had before. He wanted the man gone. He wanted Ellison to go to the principal. He wanted it fixed. I told him I would handle it, Ellison wrote. I told him to trust me. He had trusted me already and I had done nothing. He knew. What happened in the equipment room unfolded in the letters like a film with frames missing. He pushed me. One line read, then a scratched-out clause, then. I did not mean to push him back like that. He hit the rack, the corner. Another page. He stood. He said to tell the truth in the morning. I said we would. We would. He said if I didn't, he would. Another. There was more blood than I thought there would be. It is still in my teeth when I sleep. It had not taken long to turn from argument to panic. Ellison wrote about the sound the old metal lockers made when you knocked their sides, how it rang deeper than it should. He wrote about a mop bucket rolling and the wheels squeal sounding like someone else's breath. By the time a custodian half a building away had finished one corridor and turned to his cart for the next, the equipment room door had closed and the light had gone dark. Ellison wrote about a dolly, a canvas laundry cart, a tarp that smelled like rubber. He wrote about the old service tunnel off the boiler room, the one contractors had sealed in '79 and left all but forgotten, with its square of plywood like a patch over an old wound. He wrote about the weight of Tyler Reed's body arriving at a reality his mind had not yet reached. People would ask later why no one heard or saw or asked the right question, as if the right question could unspool the knot after decades. Ellison answered them before they asked. I stood in the hallway with my hands on my knees like I had just run sprints, he wrote. I came out of the earth. I locked the doors. I put my clipboard on the seat and walked toward the locker room again, and I was not the same man who had walked there the first time. He disappeared after that night, but the kind of disappearance that leaves a car, a door, a clipboard is not the kind that sends a man across the world. In a box at the county records office, there was an application for a duplicate birth certificate filed in 1985 by a man with a name that did not raise anyone's eyebrows because it was not Mark Ellison's. The name he later wore in another state, David Kellum, rested on a driver's license photo in which his hairline had receded and his mouth had learned how not to smile. He sold HVAC systems for a while. He coached a church league team and then stepped back when the attention felt like heat again. He married a woman who said later that he walked at night and came back damp with sweat, that he stared at high school fields when they drove past them with a look that made her think he had been very good at something once and then had broken it. He volunteered at a shelter. He avoided newspaper articles about Oregon even when they had nothing to do with football. The letters in the locker did not explain why he had hidden them. They showed a man who had been sure he would give them to someone in authority, and then could not stand the sound of the next step. The last one was dated 11 days after the championship. After that, the narrow hand fell silent and the locker closed and the screws bit into the metal. He had walked away from Eugene in a body that wore 1,000 small decisions like dents. When investigators knocked on the modest ranch house with the dry lawn and the juniper hedges in 2023, the man who answered did not ask the obvious questions. He recognized the posture of two people who already knew the answer to the one they were there to ask. They looked at his eyes and saw the one thing no new name could change. He sat at his table and put his palms on the wood to keep from shaking. When they said the words, Coach Mark Ellison, October 1984, Tyler Reed, the only sound in the room came from the refrigerator fans cycling on. He confessed, but not like on television where confession comes out smooth and rehearsed. His speech broke. He tried to correct himself and failed. It was rage, he said. It made a sound in my ears like when the line judge blows the whistle too close to you. I felt suddenly that he would take away the only thing I was good at, and he was right to, and I could not let him, and then I had already done it and could not take it back. He told them about the rack, about the corner, about going still with his hand on the boy's shoulder as if his palm might coax him back. He told them about the service tunnel. He told them where to look. The tunnel lay behind 2 generations of renovations. Construction plans had shifted. Walls had been built and rebuilt. A new boiler had been set in place like a heart transplanted into a body that already had one. Still, the map the district kept in a flat drawer in the Office of Facilities told the story of the older arteries. The crew moved aside a metal shelving unit with a geometry teacher's broken stool perched on top of it, and set a square of light on the cinder block. When they cut into the wall, the smell that came out was not of decay. Time had resolved much of that, but of old heat, old water, old air with nowhere to go. In the tunnel, the concrete lip collected dust in a line like ledger blot. The back corner, where the wall met the pipe chase, gave a hollow knock. They did not find bone that day. They found cloth, a wisp of canvas that had the resilience of a leaf pressed in a dictionary, a button that had belonged to a letterman jacket, a fragment of lanyard that still left black on your thumb. Farther along the search, in soil churned during the gym expansion a decade later, a team found what the confession promised. The medical examiner spoke the name in a tone that made the fluorescent lights feel indecent. What people in Eugene remembered about Coach Mark Ellison did not dissolve when the word murderer went into the room. The mind is not respectful of single stories. The men who had been boys saw themselves running out under Friday lights, saw a man's hand the size of a dinner plate sweat their shoulder in pride, and then saw the same hand holding something too heavy to be borne. They visited the hallway photograph without anyone asking them to and looked not at the smile but at the eyes. The mother of Tyler Reed sat between 2 women with white hair and held a tissue that disintegrated in her grip. She said his name and then said the coach's name and then said nothing else for a full minute, as if the air might smooth if she stopped troubling it. There had been another man in the story all along, the one Tyler had come to talk about on the night of the championship. The investigation turned, with the steadiness that cold cases sometimes keep in reserve, back toward him. People in town felt the old shame rise. Who had known, who had looked away, who had been bought with a pair of cleats and a handshake? Records surfaced. Another letter in Ellison's stack made it clear he had intended to go to the principal in the morning, and had not lived in the morning after that night. The man with the key died in 1996. A photograph in the paper that made the retired coaches put down their coffee cups carefully. What could be prosecuted had to be. What could not be named had to be named anyway. In PTA meetings, in awkward assemblies where 50-year-old men stood on stages and told teenagers they were sorry for what had been allowed. Ellison's confession made a structure out of what had always been a rumor, and the town found itself suddenly with lumber and nails and the duty to build something harder than denial. A sports writer who had covered the team in 1984 and then gotten out of local news to sell insurance sat at his kitchen table and reopened his box of clippings because he could not shake the feeling that he had noticed Tyler's absence and written nothing at all. He ran his finger down the list of names in the game summary and breathed out when he saw Tyler's last catch in the second quarter recorded in ink and preserved against time. The Wire story about Ellison's disappearance had boiled him down to a sentence and a half. In the margin of that clipping, in his own hand, younger, brisker, he had written, "No signs of foul play." He stared at his own words a long time. The janitor who had found the locker went back to the corridor that had given up its secret and stood with his mop like a flag. He had thought about the whistle lying there for years unnoticed. He thought about how many passes that hallway had seen, boys slapping hands and shouting, grief and joy equal at a door and a row of metal, Mark Ellison turning a key and not knowing that a row of cabinets would someday be pushed aside to show what he could not face. He had told himself that buildings remembered. He had not known how literally he meant it. There were details that did not leave the investigators easily. The letters had been written on paper pulled from the school's mimeograph room, the kind that left your fingertips blue in certain light if you dragged them just so. A faint shadow of a quiz keyed on the page behind one letter ghosted through. Defined clipping penalty. In another, a single word had been written and then written again with more pressure until it carved a faint valley into the sheet. Stop. The path of Ellison's escape had been modest and careful. Cash jobs, a vehicle purchased from a man whose last name he never learned, a room in a boarding house where no one asked 2 questions in a row. He had not hidden like a man who thought he deserved to get away. He had lived like a man who expected to be found every time a car slowed in front of his house. What the town did with the resolution of the coach's secret locker did not look like a parade or a headline that solved anything. It looked like alumni sitting on the edge of a refloored gym, feet swinging over the line where free throws lived. It looked like an assistant coach in his 60s calling 3 players he had kept in his phone under their jersey numbers and asking if they wanted to get coffee. It looked like the current coach starting the season with a meeting where he named Tyler Reed out loud in a room of kids who had not been alive when he disappeared, and then naming the rules the school would live by and what those rules were for. And it looked like this. The letters, once evidence, sat in a climate-controlled room in the county archives after the case closed, copies made for the Reed family to keep if they wanted them and to burn if they did not. The whistle remained locked in a box that did not belong to a gym, or a coach or a rumor. People who had loved football learned how to love it with a bruise on it. People who had loved Mark Ellison learned that love could be rearranged but not unmade. People who had never heard of Eugene felt something familiar in the story because it had happened in their towns in different clothes. In October 1984, high school football coach Mark Ellison disappeared after his team's championship victory in Eugene, Oregon, and the sentence still opened every conversation, even in 2023 when the locker gave up what it had guarded and when Ellison, living for decades under another name, finally called what he had done by its right name. The hall photo with the banner reading, "Coach of the Year, 1984," became a study in how memory worked against truth until truth insisted. The clipboard on the car seat no longer looked like an absent-minded detail. It read like a stage cue no one had known how to deliver. The driver's door left open became a hinge the town swung on for nearly 4 decades. People asked the investigators whether Ellison had cried when he confessed. They expected the answer to hold some key to what kind of man he had been. The truth was harder and simpler. He had held very still. He had spoken as if Tyler were in the next room and might walk in if he paused long enough. "I heard the gym when we won," he said. "I kept hearing it. I still heard it when I tried to tell the truth the first time and put the letters away." One of the detectives, who had been a freshman at a different school in 1984 and remembered what Friday nights felt like down in his ribs, looked at the man across the table and thought, not kindly and not cruelly, just clearly, here sat the echo of a town's best night and worst night in a single body. The janitor's discovery had not been a miracle. It had been maintenance. A leak, a cabinet, a piece of metal that wasn't where it should have been. It fit the rest of the story in a way that made a certain kind of moral sense. The solution had been built into the school like a sentence tucked into a book, and then shelved. The people who had lived in the long shadow of the sentence began, slowly, to read it all the way through. They told it to each other at kitchen tables and as the late bell rang and in conversations that started with weather and ended with the way a whistle sounded when it cut too close to your ear. They said Tyler Reed's name carefully, and then with more ease. They said Coach Mark Ellison's the same way. They learned to let both names live in the same breath without trying to force one to disappear the other. On an evening in late fall after the 2023 discovery, rain tapped the old brick face of the school and kids ran with their hoodies up. A teacher paused by the hallway photo. The banner above it had been replaced with a small plaque that did not tell the whole story because no plaque could. It gave the dates and the fact that the case had been solved. In a quieter font, it thanked the people who had come forward and the people who had listened. Down the hall, behind a door that no longer locked quite right because everything old in the building had shifted a quarter inch during the last renovation, the corridor where the sealed locker had stood kept its smell of old paper and metal. The teacher stood there a long time, as if waiting for the building to say the rest of what it knew. The weeks after the discovery turned the town into a long conversation that never really stopped. In classrooms, in line at the grocery store, at the diner under the framed newspaper from October 1984 about the championship win, people went back over the same sentences and found new edges to them. In October 1984, high school football coach Mark Ellison disappeared after his team's championship victory in Eugene, Oregon. And everything that followed now read differently because of what the janitor had pulled from the sealed locker in 2023, the handwritten letters in Ellison's narrow hand, the blood-stained whistle with Tyler Reed's DNA, the clipped articles. The way Ellison's fingerprints sat on every page like a man pressing down to keep paper from buckling. The driver's door left open on his car returned in every retelling. The clipboard on the front seat returned. His hallway photo under the Coach of the Year, 1984. Banner returned and would not leave. The story kept its shape and also changed every time a different person spoke. One of Ellison's former assistants, a man named Ron Hale with a buzz cut that had surrendered long ago and a voice that always sounded like a whistle had just blown, sat with a reporter from Portland at a picnic table outside the school and said, not for the first time, that he had gone back inside the gym that night because he had left his stopwatch in his office. He had heard the echo of someone in the equipment corridor and assumed it was Mark locking up. "I yelled," he told the reporter. "I said, 'Coach? You still in here?' Got nothing back but my own voice. I didn't go down there. Never thought I needed to." His hands made a shape in the air like he could hold the hallway still and search it the way he should have in 1984. He admitted he had not liked the volunteer aide much, the one Tyler had come to talk about, the man with the key and the money for cleats. But he had liked winning, and the aide had stayed out of the locker room when adults were around, and that had been enough of an excuse. The detective who took Ellison's confession, a woman named Alvarez who had grown up 2 hours away and come to Eugene for college and ended up staying, kept a binder with copies of the letters and a timeline that she had rewritten 5 times because she needed the sequence to live in her bones. She drew lines, October 1984, championship, coach last seen locking up, car door open, clipboard on the seat. November 1984. Tyler's name fading from roll call. 2023. Janitor found locker. Whistle DNA to Tyler. Fingerprints to Ellison. Confession in another state from a man living under a different name, until the page looked like a field with routes on it. When she visited the service tunnel under the old gym with the facilities crew, she put her hand on the cinder block and kept it there for a count of 10. The block felt cool, indifferent, like a wall had felt 1,000 times to 1,000 hands. She carried that sensation back into interviews, the neutrality of things versus the heat of human choices. Tyler Reed's mother, Lorraine, had outlived 2 husbands, a thyroid surgery, and the kind of grief that plants you in a chair and makes the rest of the world move around you. She had not kept his room as a shrine. Time had had its way with the linens and the carpet, but she had saved his Letterman jacket, the one with the missing button the crew later found near the pipe chase. When Alvarez brought her the copies of Ellison's letters, Lorraine asked her to sit not at the kitchen table but in the living room, where the old TV from the 80s still worked if you struck the side of it. She read slowly. At the line where Ellison wrote, "He said if I didn't he would." She laid the paper on her lap and looked out the window at the power lines, as if the sentence had found a match in those horizontal cables and could rest there instead of in her hands. "He was a good kid," she said, and then, after a minute, "He didn't keep his mouth shut when silence was what men wanted from him." The janitor, whose name turned out to be Nate Warr, had worked in the district for 28 years without anyone learning that he collected old radios and could coax them back into sound. He put the photograph of the locker, taken just as the door opened, letters and whistle visible, into a drawer with a handful of vacuum tubes and a Bakelite dial he had been meaning to glue. When the principal asked him if he would mind speaking at a staff meeting about what he had found, he said he would rather not, then said he would anyway, then stood under the fluorescent lights in the library and told 30 adults that he had rolled a cabinet away because of a leak. "I'm no hero," he said. "I do maintenance." The math teacher with the soft voice said afterward that maintenance had solved more than one kind of problem in that building. On a Friday night 3 weeks after the discovery, the current team played a home game in a rain that came down clean and steady. They wore a small patch with the number 81 on their sleeves, Tyler's number, and ran out to a stadium that had grown stands since 1984 but still smelled the same because wet metal smelled the same no matter how many seats you welded to it. The public address announcer read a short statement about the case, named Tyler, named Coach Mark Ellison, named the families, named the building staff who had brought the truth forward. People stood while the band stayed still. The head coach, who had been a toddler in 1984, met his captains at midfield and felt a small, unsteady ship moving under his feet. He did not make a speech. He touched the shoulder of the kid who now wore 81 and sent them out. A former player from that 1984 team, Darren Walsh, walked the perimeter of the field like he had done as a boy to burn off a nervous energy he had never lost. He had been a lineman, had kept his head down through the noise, had loved Coach Ellison the way a boy loves a man who sees him as a wall and a door at once. When Tyler had stopped showing up, Darren had told himself he hadn't noticed because receivers floated in and out, because they were always sleek and easy and forgettable to a boy who lived in the mud of the line. It was not true. He had noticed. He had said nothing. He found Alvarez by the concession stand and told her he had been there that fall when a parent had come into the locker room to shout about playing time and that he had watched Ellison step between the man and the boys with a kind of practiced gentleness. "He protected us," Darren said. "And then he didn't, and then he broke the world he had built protecting us." He said he did not know how to hold both thoughts. Alvarez told him she did not know either, and they stood under the eave together until the band started up again and made talking impossible. The principal called a meeting with the school board, and the agenda ran long and strange because policy had to meet the shape of a story. They talked about keys and who had them. They talked about outside volunteers and how many pairs of eyes they needed in rooms. They talked about the way roomers had been treated in 1984 and how rumor had often stood in for a call that no one made because the voice died in their throat. The board president, a woman who had been a sophomore that championship year, brought the gavel down and said they would write new rules in the plainest words they could. In a later meeting, the superintendent asked that plaques come down if they encouraged hagiography instead of history. What went back up would be smaller and truer, able to hold more than one meaning at once. A journalist from a national magazine arrived and wrote a long piece that did not land quite right in town. He got the dates correct. October 1984 in Eugene, the car found with its driver's door open, the clipboard on the front seat with the felt-tip pen still uncapped, the photo with Coach of the Year, 1984. The locker unearthed in 2023 with its letters and the blood-stained whistle, the forensic tests, the fingerprints, the confession from a man living under a different name, and he set them in a polished ark. But he missed how mundane the horror had been, how the path had wound through a dolly and a tarp and a service tunnel and a series of ordinary avoidances. He used the phrase, double life, and the phrase, dark secret, and a line about Friday night lights. People cut the article out anyway and put it on fridges. In the archive room at the county building, a young clerk scanned Ellison's letters for preservation and paused sometimes over a line that snagged the mind. I put the whistle in my mouth and bit down, one line read, because I could not hear myself thinking. The clerk looked at the photograph of the whistle in evidence, that small cylinder of metal that had hung on Ellison's chest in games and later had marked the letters like a paperweight, and understood what it meant to silence a sound outside in order to hear a sound inside. How often that choice had ended badly for everyone in this story. In interviews, the man who had been Ellison and had lived as David Kellum rarely tried to shape the narrative beyond the pieces he had already given the detectives. He did not ask his lawyer to coach him in softer words. He said, "Moment of rage," and the phrase stuck to the case like a label that did not cover the jar. He spoke about the days after October 1984 when he slept in his car in rest stops and woke saying Tyler's name out loud. He spoke about the time he had almost phoned the Eugene police from a payphone and had not because a boy walked by in a football jacket, and the sight of the patch had made his breath turn hot and useless. He spoke about the letter he had written to the principal and never sent, the one that lay in the locker still folded, taped shut, addressed but without a stamp. He had walked into the post office twice with it, and out again both times. The investigator tracked down the retired principal, the one who had stood for years at pep rallies leading a chant with his fist up, and found him in a retirement home where the television played a game show so loudly that conversation bent around it. The principal read the copies of Ellison's letters with his lips moving. He said he had liked the volunteer aide just fine and had never heard a complaint he had believed enough to act on. When Alvarez told him she had talked to 3 boys who had approached him in 1984 with worry in their voices, he blinked, then tilted his head as if listening to a call from far away. "If that is true," he said, "then I failed them." He said it without drama, in a voice worn down to the facts. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked what the school had done now. Alvarez told him about the policies and the training. He nodded. "All right," he said. "Then at least we moved something forward." A small memorial for Tyler took shape near the north end zone under the old maple trees that shed their leaves like confetti every fall. It began as a framed photo and a jersey on a folding chair and swelled to candles and notes, and a box where kids could leave statements. A girl from the current team's student section wrote that she had never known Tyler but that he felt like a cousin now because everyone said his name with the kind of sorrow people reserved for family. A boy wrote that he had been scared to tell a teacher last year about a man in his apartment complex who made him uncomfortable and that after this he had told her anyway. He signed it with his first name only and the number of his jersey. Ellison's letters contained a page that had not been mentioned in initial reports because it connected to the man with the key, the aide who had been the subject of Tyler's attempt to warn his coach. It described a practice late in September when the aide had walked too slowly through a gauntlet of boys doing a drill and had set his hand too easily on a young shoulder. "I saw it and did not see it," Ellison wrote. "I let my want for order turn to a kind of blindness." The page ended with a sentence that Lorraine read 3 times and then put in a separate pile. "If Tyler had not come to me, I could have told myself I had not been told," it said. "He told me. He did his part. I failed mine." Lorraine kept that page on her fridge with a magnet shaped like a red apple and looked at it when she made tea. It did not comfort her. It kept her company in an honest way. At a church basement suppers club where old players met once a month, they passed around a shoebox with pictures from the 1984 season and told the truth more plainly than they ever had. They remembered the way Tyler had looked when he came back to the huddle after a big catch, eyes bright, chest heaving, a grin he had tried to swallow because Ellison had liked composure. They remembered the bus rides and the juice smell of the training room and the way the gym echoed like a cave. They remembered Coach Mark Ellison telling them to keep their feet and not lose their heads. They said his name, and then they said Tyler's name, and then they let silence sit at the table with them without shooing it away. In a back office at the school, stacked trophies threw back slivered reflections as the late afternoon light slid across their plaques. A student aide assigned to clean the case lifted them one by one and wiped fingerprints. His cloth whispered over, "Coach of the Year, 1984. And he felt the impulse to put the trophy down gently, as if it were breakable in a new way. He had read the articles, he had followed the story, he had stood in the stadium for the moment of silence. He thought about the clipboard on the front seat of Ellison's car that morning, about the driver's door hanging open, about how many days the hallway light had clicked on and off since that October 1984 night when the head coach locked the gym and walked toward the locker rooms and never made it home. He thought about the janitor pushing a cabinet, about letters waiting in the dark, about a whistle carrying 2 lives' worth of truth in its metal grain. He did his job. He moved to the next shelf. He kept the glass clean so people could see what had been there all along. Before the winter set in, the district scheduled a final walkthrough of the old spaces beneath the gym, the corridors where the service tunnel had hidden what the town could not name. Investigators, facilities staff, a representative from the Reed family, and a single former player gathered at the door with flashlights. They did not go to gawk. They went because the story had to be completed with feet on concrete and eyes on the plain facts of the place. The air felt dense and mineral. Pipes hummed gently overhead. Someone brushed a sleeve against a cinder block and came away with a chalk of pale dust. They stood in the corner where the wall met the pipe chase, close to where the fragment of lanyard had been found, and no one tried to draw meaning out of the room beyond the meaning already won. A small, ugly geography had shaped a tragedy. The superintendent wrote later, "We did not consecrate it, we documented it." That felt right. The district held a closed meeting one afternoon so Lorraine Reed could decide what would happen to the letters written by the man who had once been her son's coach. They spread the pages on a long table in the library, each in its clear sleeve, under gentle lamps. Lorraine moved slowly from one to the next. She touched nothing. She read the sentence he had written over and over. "I failed him," and did not linger on it this time. She chose 3 pages to keep and asked that the rest remain with the county archives as part of the official case file. When an administrator asked whether she wished to redact anything, she shook her head. "No," she said. "We lived it. Let it be what it was." Her voice did not tremble. When she left, she paused under the hallway photo of the man the town had once honored with the banner, "Coach of the Year, 1984, and looked directly into the photographed eyes for the first time since the confession. "You should have been better," she said, barely audible. He was. In court, the man who had lived as David Kellum and had once been known to the entire town as Coach Mark Ellison did not try to steer the proceedings. The hearing did not need theater, it needed record. He stood in a sweater that hung awkwardly and answered the judge's questions plainly. He waived some rights on counsel's advice and did not contest the state's narrative of October 1984, the championship victory in Eugene, the last sight of him locking the gym and congratulating his players before heading toward the locker rooms, the car found in the morning with the driver's door open and the clipboard on the front seat, the sealed locker discovered in 2023 with the handwritten letters and the blood-stained whistle, the forensic tests linking the whistle to Tyler Reed and the fingerprints on every letter to him, and the confession to a moment of rage. He spoke once, briefly, at the end. "I took a son from a mother and a teammate from a team," he said. "I took trust from a place that needed it. I wrote down the truth and hid it. I am asking for nothing. The room stayed so quiet that the sound of someone shifting in the pews seemed loud. Sentencing felt less like a climax than like paperwork catching up to a long-fled fact. Reporters wrote the same paragraph from different angles. Former players texted one another in short, abrupt phrases and then sent long messages in the dark after midnight when no one could see them cry. The town did not throw anything out in a fury, not the trophies, not the photographs, not the history. It relabeled, reshelved, recontextualized. It named Tyler Reed where his name had been left out. It acknowledged that the man who had once been celebrated had also done the harm at the center of the story. In October 1984, high school football coach Mark Ellison disappeared after his team's championship victory in Eugene, Oregon, and everything that had once sounded like a legend now fit into a ledger: dates, entries, sworn statements, a sealed locker, a whistle with blood, letters in a narrow hand, a confession, remains recovered, a case finally closed after 39 years. On a gray Saturday, the school hosted a small ceremony at the north end zone beneath the maples. People brought camp chairs and thermoses. No one had made a stage. A portable speaker and a microphone stood on the grass that had seen 1,000 cleats. The current head coach spoke first and kept it short. He named Tyler. He named Coach Mark Ellison, without adjectives, without absolution. He named the janitor who had rolled a cabinet because of a leak. He named Detective Alvarez and her team. Then he stepped back and let others speak if they wished. Darren Walsh, the former lineman, went up and said he had learned to keep his feet from Coach Ellison and had learned what it meant to use his voice because of Tyler. Both of them shaped me, he said. I wish the shaping had not cost what it did. He lifted his hand like a man about to call a play and then let it fall. At the edge of the crowd, students from the current team had brought the old jersey number 81 on a hanger. They did not raise it to rafters. They pinned it carefully to a board at the memorial spot so the wind would not tug it down. A trumpet player from the school band played a slow piece that wasn't a hymn and wasn't the school's song. It went up over the oaks and then thinned. Lorraine sat between two friends. When it ended, she stood and spoke not into the microphone but to the group as if they were in her living room. I am grateful for every person who told the truth, she said. I am sorry for every boy who learned the wrong lesson while the rest of us looked away. My son wanted something simple, for adults to be brave. She sat again. A bird cried once from the far fence. Someone in the back handed tissues forward like a bucket brigade. In the weeks afterward, the practical work continued. The district published new protocols in language plain enough for freshmen to memorize. They set up a mailbox, physical and digital, where students could report concerns without going through the rumor mill. Teachers adjusted how they watched hallways after practice. The volunteer program got rebuilt with background checks and sign-in logs that recorded who stood where and when. At a faculty meeting, the principal said, "We are not honoring sorrow with signage, we are honoring it with supervision." No one clapped. They took notes. They changed shifts. They asked for more chaperones and got them. Detective Alvarez closed the binder and slid it onto the shelf with the words "solved" on the spine, not in triumph, but with the relief of accuracy. She kept a copy of the photo of the sealed locker opening, letters and whistle emerging, as a reminder that answers sometimes sat in plain rooms behind ordinary cabinets, and that the difference between rumor and record was often the torque of a single screw. She drove past the stadium one evening and saw the lights off, the field slick with rain, and thought of how that first October night had smelled of wet leaves and chalk dust and the metallic edge of autumn. She did not romanticize it. She carried the details like a ledger she could now close. The man who had once been celebrated as Coach of the Year 1984 and had later lived as David Kellum remained in custody. His wife, who had married the man he had made up, visited once and sat with him without touching the glass, then chose not to return. He did not blame her. He wrote a letter to the court asking that any personal belongings be disposed of without ceremony. He made no further statements to the press. The story no longer required his narration. In the library, the team photograph from the championship year stayed on the wall. A small plaque beneath it now read, Team Roster, 1984. Includes Tyler Reed, number 81. Photograph retained as part of a complete record. Students stopped and read it the first week it went up. Then they began to pass by it as you pass familiar furniture at home. But sometimes a senior would pause, press a palm lightly to the glass, and keep walking. The space beneath the frame felt different, not hallowed exactly, but steadied by the weight of something acknowledged. One late afternoon, the janitor, Nate Warr, returned to the equipment corridor alone. He had a new piece of baseboard to install where the leak had warped the old one. He set down his tools and looked at the section of wall that had once hidden a locker no one remembered to miss. He did not hear voices. He did not imagine ghosts. He heard the hum of the building, the way he always had, the fans, the water moving in pipes, a door latch kissing its strike plate somewhere far off. He measured twice and cut once. He drove the finished nails in flush and ran a fingertip along the seam to make sure it sat true. As he gathered his tools, he caught his reflection in the gloss of the new baseboard, a tired man who had stayed, doing a job that asked him to notice small wrongnesses until a room fit right again. That night, as the sun went down in a soft copper wash, a group of players turned out the stadium lights after practice and lingered at midfield. They passed the ball in the last of the daylight and talked the way boys do, in leaps and sideways jokes and sudden earnestness they quickly disguised. One of them, wearing 81 on his sleeve, said he had gone to the memorial and read every note in the box. It felt like the field listened, he said. Another nodded. They looked toward the school where, in October 1984, high school football coach Mark Ellison had locked up the gym after a championship victory and congratulated his players before heading toward the locker rooms, and then never made it home. They looked toward the parking lot where, the following morning, police had found his car with the driver's door open and his clipboard on the front seat. They looked toward the hallway where his photo once hung beneath Coach of the Year, 1984, and toward the corridor where, in 2023, a janitor had found the sealed locker with handwritten letters, a blood-stained whistle, and clippings about Tyler Reed. They did not rehearse the words. They had learned the story the way you learn a route tree, repetition until the body knows where to go. When they finally jogged off, their cleats clicked on the track. The last one out flipped the switch by the gate. Darkness took the field cleanly, and with it, a quiet sunk over the stands. The town had not erased its past or polished it into something easy. It had said the hard names and done the dull work and accepted the plain, unadorned ending the facts aloud. After 39 years, the coach's secret locker had been opened. After 39 years, Tyler Reed had been brought back into the story in the only way the living could bring him back. The field, left to itself, held the day's heat and let it go. The building did what buildings did, it kept its shape and its hum. And the people who lived with the story, players grown old, mothers, teachers, custodians, kids in New Jerseys, carried it forward in the only honest way left to them, with vigilance, with ordinary kindness, and with the understanding that the truth had found them not by miracle but by maintenance.